Welcome to Raiders Uncovered. I am Biggs. He is Raiderdamus. We're here to talk to you. We're here to talk to you
Yes, you
about Raiders.
specifically you.
You, you,
Yeah.
about Raiders goings on, and there are some things to talk about. So let's get into it after we chat a little bit about how'd your week go, Raiderdamus?
The week was a very interesting week. In my lifetime, the Raiders have changed coaches approximately 5,637 times.
Approximately, give or take.
So, yeah, I mean, I've been around for a while. So, this is nothing new to me. However, having Tom Brady in control of your team is new to me. Um, So just to see the way that things are different and the amount of like respect and deference that the Raiders are getting in the media right now, as opposed to the normal disdain and dismissal that the Raiders get from the media, it's nice to see. Not that the Raiders have done anything yet to deserve that, but just the fact that the team is getting the same amount of the benefit of the doubt as every other team does and should before they go and do something stupid is nice. And the fact that all of the potential head coaches that I've heard that the Raiders have interviewed are actually competent, or the ones that are planning on interviewing in the future appear to be competent. Guys like Pete Carroll and Todd Monken. These are guys I would put on the top of any potential head coaching search. Todd Monken's been a guy I followed since he was at the University of Georgia. He appears to be a guy who knows football and is good at coaching the game of football, as we can see with the Baltimore Ravens this year. He's a guy who definitely deserves a head coaching gig. I'm sure he'll find one, maybe not necessarily this year, but in the very, very near future, he will get a head coaching job. The Raiders do not have the normal bunch of slapdicks and scrubs on their head coaching search list that they typically do. So it's nice to see that an adult is actually running the show this time.
Right. It's not, the likes of Tom Cable lining up and Norv Turner. I mean, I'm not a fan of retreads. So, the whole like Pete Carroll, Mike McCarthy kind of like parade of veteran coaches. I'm not into it. But we'll get into that more in a second when we talk about this. It's the State of the Nation. All of you know the Raiders have moved on from head coach Antonio Pierce and general manager Tom Telesco. Up in the air are Scott Turner and his papa Norv and Patrick Graham, defensive coordinator. But there is the thought out there that with the regime change at the general manager position and head coach will be new coordinators. Sad to see Patrick Graham go. I like that dude a lot. He's one of my favorite people in the NFL. But he is he's certainly free to interview everywhere, and he's not long for this team. I think so. With that, the rumors are flying. It's rumor season. That's what we're doing right now. We're smack dab in the middle of January, and there's no Raiders football. There is playoff football, and there are teams dropping out left and right, literally, and then there are the coaching decisions. So at the top of the list, Detroit Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson. I mean, there is a very select crew of people out there, myself included, who have him at the very top of the list simply because of his innovation with offensive football. He is a dude that does like run first football. The foundation of that Detroit Lions team right now is certainly David Montgomery and Jahmyr Biggs. Sorry, I did it. Jahmyr Gibbs. They have some wide receivers, but I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown is a target machine, and he's an elite wide receiver, but I feel like that's a plug and play spot, and you could find somebody with a similar profile to Amon-Ra St. Brown and make him into a star. David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs bring a certain specific set of tools to the party, and then you have Derek Carr reincarnate in Jared Goff. So there, for the mediocrity that Jared Goff has traditionally been looked at, Ben Johnson's, I mean, he's on the cusp of a Super Bowl run again. They very easily could have beat the 49ers last year. The defense has been playing out of their mind. So Aaron Glenn is another guy that the Raiders have been slated to interview. All of the interviews at this point, I think, are virtual. But let's talk Ben Johnson for a second, because he is the marquee guy. What are your thoughts on Ben Johnson, and what is the realistic shot of waiting until after either the Lions bow out or win the Super Bowl to finalize that deal?
Well, at this point, the Raiders have nothing to lose by waiting. They would only benefit because the Bears might get a little bit antsy and hire Mike McCarthy. And at this point, the Bears are really the only competition besides the Jaguars, and I don't really consider the Jaguars competition for the services of Ben Johnson. Now, as far as Johnson himself, he was the marquee hot coaching name last year after the Detroit Lions season ended at the hands of the Niners, unfortunately, because the Lions absolutely should have won that game. They choked it away in the second half in horrific fashion. And he could have gotten his pick of any head coaching gig he wanted last season. But there are a lot of coordinators who don't need to be above that position. There are a lot of coordinators that we've seen try out to be head coaches and absolutely suck. There are plenty of them. Wade Phillips is a guy who comes to mind. Norv Turner would be another one. But the NFL is riddled with guys like that who need to be OCs or position coaches and don't need to be head coaches because that's a totally different skill set. So Ben Johnson, in his infinite wisdom, went back to the Detroit Lions for one more season. And I saw absolutely nothing out of the Lions that would dissuade me from the fact that Ben Johnson is head coach material. His offense is innovative. They play really hard for him. I mean, they certainly play hard for Dan Campbell, but you can tell his offense is very well coached. They execute as well as any team in the NFL. Their philosophy is run, and destroy you with passing because they can do either one exceptionally well. If they wanted to be a pass-first team, they absolutely could. They're just not. It reminds me of the mid-2000s New York Giants with Brandon Jacobs and Tiki Barber, or the early 2000s Raiders with Charlie Garner and Tyrone Wheatley. That's a recipe for success when you have a capable passing attack and that sort of thunder and lightning rushing attack. You can do that as long as you guys execute it well and you have a good offensive line, which the Lions may have the best offensive line in the NFL. It's arguable that they do.
Yeah.
With Decker and Sewell on either side of them and some really good guards and a good center, you can't really argue with what they've got going on there. Aaron Glenn is a guy I think is really interesting because he has dealt with a lot of what Patrick Graham has dealt with this year, which is a lot of stars who are hurt. If you look at the IR roster of the Detroit Lions right now, that roster could beat most regular teams. The guys who the Lions have that are hurt, that could probably beat a lot of actual NFL rosters that are playing right now
Easily.
Yeah. So Patrick Graham has not been dealing with a full deck of cards, and he's still been winning. So I'm sorry, I meant Aaron Glenn has been doing that. Patrick Graham did a little bit of that, but not quite as much as we would have liked.
Right.
But Aaron Glenn has done that. I suspect Aaron Glenn will be a major candidate for the New York Jets job. I think he's probably the best candidate for the New York Jets job. I'd be surprised if they didn't take him. I think Aaron Glenn has earned the shot to be a head coach. And I would be surprised if he wasn't hired by them or somebody else very, very soon. I think Ben Johnson, I think the cards are just lining up a little too perfectly for Tom Brady to bring him in as the next Raiders guy. We need to remember, though, that the last Raiders coach to earn an extension, I believe, was Art Shell. Every other coach we've had since Art Shell, and I think his first term as Raiders coach was one and done. Right. So the measure of success, should Ben Johnson become the head coach of the Raiders, is does he earn a second contract after his 3 or 4 years are up, or even before that, because a lot of these guys have lasted 1 or 2 years, or 1.5 years in the case of Josh Daniels. So if he can earn a coaching contract extension, then I think the Raiders are in a good spot. I was not pleased to see Tom Telesco go. because I think he did a fantastic job with the draft and building a roster. A lot of things didn't work out, but that's not necessarily on Tom Telesco. He will be fine. People saw what he can do with not only with the Chargers but with the Raiders, and he will land somewhere and he will have plenty of success. I'm not worried about him. I'm just sad he's not part of the organization anymore. But when you are starting over as severely as the Raiders are, and you want to bring in a head coach these days, you have to offer them some semblance of control. And
Right.
the way they have control in a non-Belichick or Pete Carroll way is for them to bring in a GM who is joined at the hip with them.
Right.
Which have not done in a pretty much ever, because Al Davis was the GM for so long, and they've had GM sort of staggered with head coach since then. So if Ben Johnson brings along whoever it is he wants and has some control over the roster, I think that will be a pretty big incentive to sign that dotted line.
Yeah, but that still surprises me that, especially with an opportunity like Ben Johnson, to have somebody in place that has a year of roster construction under his belt, a fairly good draft, cleared up some cap space, albeit not re-signing like Amik Robertson, who we liked and wished we didn't have to watch go, Josh Jacobs, etc. He did clear up a whole bunch of cap space and set us up for a huge free agency in 2025. And I think that type of general manager for Ben Johnson would have been ideal. Now, that said, yes, you want two guys that are going to be kind of on the same page. And even thinking that McDaniels and Ziegler were going to be like that didn't happen. The case for Aaron Glenn, who the Raiders did interview on Friday, same day that they interviewed Ben Johnson and the next guy that we're going to talk about. The thing about Aaron Glenn that has been impressive to me was that win against the Minnesota Vikings. And it showed that wasn't a personnel thing. That wasn't he had the most talented roster out on the field. He was the smartest coach. He was the defensive coordinator that schemed an absolute win. And Sean McVay yesterday took a page from that and absolutely shut down the Minnesota Vikings, who a lot of teams had a hard time doing that. Somebody figured out that you have to pressure Sam Darnold, and that Minnesota Vikings offensive line was exploitable, took them out of the running game, and 25 QB pressures later, Minnesota's bounced, and the Los Angeles Rams continue on in the playoffs. So Aaron Glenn is definitely a guy that I would love to see come over. Although I do want an offensive-minded head coach, which is kind of like the way people are trying to trend. It used to be defensive-minded head coaches were Dave Regier. Now it's offensive guys. The other thing is that hiring a coordinator is hiring to be a head coach may not necessarily be the thing that we want, because they're good at coordinator. That doesn't mean that they're good at head coach. And the Lions situation kind of shows that. You've got Dan Campbell, who is an absolute dog at head coach. And then he's got Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, two certified geniuses who are running those different sides of the ball. And their general manager does a lot of good things. So hopefully we can finally put something in place. You mentioned Art Shell being the last Raiders head coach to get a contract extension. He is one of the last two Raiders head coaches to get a separate second contract. He and John Gruden. I'm glad that the John Gruden rumors faded really fast. Now the next guy is fairly interesting, because not a lot of times do you see a guy who comes over in division, and there's not just one but two now. There were reports earlier about somebody else within the division coming over, but Steve Spagnuolo of the Chiefs, I like what he does, and I feel like what I want more is the irony of him taking over as Raiders head coach, and then the Raiders passing the Chiefs, eliminating their dynasty, being the dynasty stopper. I think that would just make a great, fun story as a fan. But what do you think about Steve Spagnuolo?
I mean, the Chiefs' defense has been overachievers, I think, for a long time. And that's a reflection on Steve Spagnuolo. I'm not sure if this is the cycle for him to get a head coaching gig, but I think he'll get one in the next 2 or 3 years. I'm just not sure about right now. I think he probably is in the best place for him right now. But I would not be opposed to any team that wanted to sign him. Um, I think the Saints might be a good landing spot for him. I think the Cowboys might be a good landing spot for him. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about the Raiders because I think the Raiders have their hearts set on Ben Johnson, and I think they will get Ben Johnson in the long run. But Spagnuolo coming over here with with him being with the Chiefs for so long and having insight into Andy Reid and knowing what Andy Reid does would certainly be a boon. But I think to beat the Chiefs, you kind of have to outscore them. And it would really depend on what kind of assistance Spagnuolo would be able to snag for those roles, because he's been in the league a long time. He has plenty of connections. I don't think it would be a problem. I'm just not sure it would be anybody on the level of Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson, to me, reminds me a lot more of Sean McVay than he does of like a Cliff Kingsbury or a Lincoln Riley, two guys who I don't think have any business being head coaches and are perfectly good as offensive coordinators, as we see with the Washington Commanders this year. Cliff Kingsbury is their offensive coordinator, and they had a fantastic season, and they're still playing. Unlike a lot of the teams who probably wanted Cliff Kingsbury to be their head coach. So, I mean, some people just need to stay where they're at, and that's okay. But, in a business like football coaching, everyone has ambition. Everybody wants that next gig. Everybody wants a bigger and better gig. That's why we see so much turnover in coaching, why we see guys go from, group of 5 conferences to power 5 conferences when they show they can hack it. Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. But everybody wants to keep moving up. Everybody wants to go coach at Georgia or Alabama or Miami or a school like that. No one's happy at like Purdue. You're just not. I mean, even if you were born in freaking West Lafayette, you're not going to be happy being the Purdue head coach. If Penn State comes calling, you got to go.
Even a program like the University of Washington, which within the last few decades has won national championship, you take over there, get to the national championship game, and still skip for Alabama. It's like there are those prestige jobs. So you got Spagnuolo, and then the other name that was thrown out there was Todd Monken. Love him as the Ravens offensive coordinator. We've touched on 2 names so far: Todd Monken and good Lord, Todd Monken and you said Cliff Kingsbury. Yeah. It's very easy to be a successful head coach when you have Jaden Daniels. It's very easy to be a successful head coach when you have Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson, or a good offensive coordinator. However, Monken has shown that he can innovate at the college level. He did it with Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey and Zamir White, and moved on to the NFL. And the Ravens right now are an absolute wagon. They're a freight train, and it's looking tough for anybody to stop them, including the Chiefs, unless there's some shenanigans from the refs like we're expecting.
There will be. There will be. It's not even a question.
But talent is the thing that is going to be able to win. You can scheme all you want. Kevin O'Connell is a fantastic coach for the Minnesota Vikings, and he was out talented. That Rams defensive line out muscled the Vikings offense, or the Rams defensive line out muscled the offensive line. Sam Darnold held the ball for a little bit too long. So the other names that are out there, Pete Carroll has been discussed. Mike McCarthy has been discussed, and Deion Sanders has been discussed. Now, Deion Sanders he said he'd love to come to Vegas, and we tried to turn our heads and not listen. And then he had a discussion with Jerry Jones. So adjacent to the Raiders head coach search, we do have the rumor out there that Deion Sanders might land himself in Dallas, and with that, trade Dak Prescott to the Las Vegas Raiders.
Dak Prescott is one of those guys who makes way too much money for what he does. I think Dak Prescott should make about 40% of what he does for the production that he gives you and his injury proneness. I wouldn't touch Dak Prescott with a 10-foot pole. I don't think you need to be paying that much money for a guy who hasn't proven that he can win consistently in the playoffs. For somebody like that, you need, if you want to pay that much money for a quarterback, you need somebody like Jalen Hurts or Patrick Mahomes or even a Matt Stafford, somebody who's shown that they can win at the highest level. You don't want to get somebody who is a proven choker. You know, things that aren't even necessarily his fault, but things that if he'd made a few plays here or there, you know, could have been different, and they weren't. I mean, Dak Prescott has consistently been the most disappointing player in football, in my eyes, for probably the last 5 years. Deion Sanders might talk his way into Dallas as the Cowboys head coach. I would not be shocked whatsoever because Jerry Jones is insane, and I'll be talking about that whole thing later on in the show. If Deion goes somewhere, he's going to want to coach his son, and probably both of them, unfortunately, because one of them is an NFL talent and the other one should be bagging groceries at Alpha Beta. It's going to be an absolute shit show, as things with the Cowboys usually and almost always are. They're going to try to trade up with the Titans, and the Titans absolutely should, tell them to take a long walk off a short pier and don't bother me again. Why don't you go down and draft a running back at 7 like you ought to do? He might land himself in Dallas, but I don't see it working out the way he thinks it will.
My prediction is that they trade up to the Giants. Dak Prescott goes to New York, and they draft Shador.
Well, the Giants are dumb enough to do that.
Right? That's what I'm saying. All right. So I think we're in agreement. Ben Johnson is the guy that we want. What about the GM candidates? Because there have been some GM names that have been linked to the Raiders. Let me see if I can find that real quick. Okay. Beyond just making Tom Brady the general manager, where'd it go? Okay. We requested interviews with Sheldon White from the Steelers, John Eric Sullivan, who's the Packers vice president of player personnel, scheduled an interview with John Spytek, the Buccaneers assistant general manager. That brings up another guy that we haven't talked about, and that's Buccaneers offensive coordinator Liam Cohen, who should get some run. In addition, there's Ejiro Evero, the defensive coordinator from the Carolina Panthers, who last year Hondo Carpenter thought that he had a chance to come in, and if he got an interview with the Raiders, he was going to become the Raiders' new head coach. So far, Evero has not interviewed with the Raiders, so that it would just be speculation. But what do you think of, that's a few GM candidates who they've put together playoff teams as VPs of player personnel, and that's essentially what general manager does: roster construction, cap shenanigans, drafting. It kind of like there's an adage in sports that you don't move on from somebody unless there's a better candidate that you have a chance to bring in. It kind of begs the question again about Tom Telesco, but maybe those guys have good relationships with Ben Johnson that I don't know about. And we don't want a guy like Mike McCarthy or Pete Carroll who's going to come in and be the head coach and general manager. So what about your thoughts on general manager search?
Well, I think the most smoke I've heard is around John Spytek. I think he does, if I remember correctly, have some history with Ben Johnson. I think they worked together a few times, and I think if Johnson were to come in, Spytek is probably the guy that he would want to work with. And I think it probably would be a package deal for the two at that point. I haven't heard a lot of smoke around the other guys, although I do know that all of them are highly respected around the league and they would all do a fantastic job. But then Tom Telesco did a fantastic job and still got fired. So,
Right.
I mean, Tom Brady and Mark Davis are doing all of this for a specific reason, in a specific order, with specific people. And I think Spatek might be one of those people. They're not just going to screw around and fire Tom Telesco for nothing and fire Antonio Pierce for nothing. Even if the season didn't work out, if you don't have a plan, well, as the saying goes, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And as Tom Brady said the other day, specifically, he said hope is not a strategy.
Right.
Which is something I've always lived by. Hope is hope. Hope is, the essence of things not seen, as Romans says. Yeah. And that's not a viable strategy in football. You have to know what you're doing or you freaking don't.
The last guy is it has been requested to talk to defensive coordinator of the Denver Broncos as the head coach, Vance Joseph. Now, we've seen what Vance Joseph brings to the table as a head coach. We watched him bungle multiple Tom Telesco seasons with the San Diego Chargers. I feel like that's more of like a satisfaction of the Rooney Rule, kind of like the Patriots interviewed somebody fairly surprising before they hired Mike Vrabel, and some people were out there saying, oh, well, are they? And I was like, no, that's a Rooney Rule thing. Once they get that out of the way, they're going to hire Mike Vrabel, and that happened. I feel like Vance Joseph is just like, hey, come on in, satisfy the Rooney Rule, and then we're going to move on.
Yeah, I think we've all seen enough of Vance Joseph as the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals. Or was it the Denver Broncos? Or it was the DC of the Cardinals and the head coach of the Broncos, if I recall correctly. I could be wrong about that. But we've seen more than enough from Vince Joseph to know that we do not want him anywhere near this franchise.
Right.
He has proven to be exactly what he is, which is an above-average defensive coordinator. And you can make millions upon millions of dollars doing that. And you do not need any more ambition than that if we've seen what you can do. Now, guys like Vance Joseph are always going to keep trying. They're always going to interview for the next job and keep trying to turn it around. But that doesn't always work. And sometimes you're better off just, adhering to the Peter principle and realize that you have been promoted to your level of incompetence and, stay in your lane. And I'm not trying to, piss on anybody's parade here, but that's the truth of life. Sometimes you're okay where you're at and it's okay.
Is that a Janet Jackson song, The Peter Principle? No, everybody in Raider Nation should remember the win over the Chargers when Vance Joseph ran like a minute off the clock on the 2-minute drive when he had a timeout in the bag, and they just couldn't get close enough. If you were mad about Antonio Pierce's clock management, wait till you get a load of Vance Joseph. All right.
I get really mad about the clock management of head coaches in the NFL, and then I play college football 25 on the PlayStation, and I forget that there's no time left in the first half, and I'm running a play, and all of a sudden it's halftime, and I'm like, what the hell happened? And then I realize this shit's really hard. So who am I to complain about what these professional men making millions of dollars are doing when I can't even get it right on a freaking video game in the privacy of my own home?
You're a couch coach, bro. We have every right to complain. All right, let's get to the Slayers of the week, and let's just talk about. I know. So our Slayers of the week this week are going to be potential targets for the Raiders in free agency. All right, there have been some players that have been linked to the Raiders. The rumor of Dak Prescott being traded to the Raiders is out there. T. Higgins is somebody that I have said that the Raiders, with their cap space, are going to go after hard as long as the Cincinnati Bengals don't re-sign him. Another guy that essentially just cashed out his ability to get get a huge contract from the Minnesota Vikings is Sam Darnold, who had a kind of a career resurrection, looked good through most of the season, like had some pretty prolific numbers, just got absolutely bamboozled, bushwhacked by Sean McVay's Los Angeles Rams. We've seen that before. We saw Jared Goff, who is a competent quarterback, go into a Super Bowl against Bill Belichick and get schemed out of the building. It's there have been better quarterbacks than Sam Darnold that have experienced that. In fact, this last weekend, Justin Herbert had a worse game by DVOA or expected DVOA than Sam Darnold did. Justin Herbert had an atrocious game against the Houston Texans, losing me money. And one more time, I don't appreciate you, Justin Herbert. So with that, if the Minnesota Vikings let him walk, obviously tens of millions of dollars have just come off the table for Sam Darnold, making him even more affordable for the Raiders to go out and target. I don't have a problem with Sam Darnold coming in, playing at least a year, 2025, and then seeing what we can do. Because the thing is, if Sam Darnold fails, that just makes our 2026 draft spot even better.
Yeah, I've never been a huge fan of Sam Darnold because
nobody has.
I mean, even in his days at USC, I watched plenty of Sam Darnold at USC. And if you pressure Sam Darnold, if you get in his face, he's a turnover machine. Always has been, was with the Jets, was in the last few weeks with the Vikings, always will be. If you have a really good pocket around him, Sam Darnold is a killer. I mean, he's an absolute assassin if he has time. Unfortunately, the Raiders right now have an offensive line that's more or less in flux. They have several positions on that line which are, have plug-and-play guys, going in and out of the lineup on a regular basis, and they don't have a scheme yet that I think Sam Darnold could thrive in, like the one Jared Goff is thriving in right now. Now, if you bring that's my next point. If you bring in Ben Johnson and draft a couple offensive linemen and shore that up, then I think Sam Darnold makes sense. But by that time, free agency will be over.
And with that said, what Ben Johnson has done with Jared Goff, Aiden O'Connell was the 9th best quarterback in the NFL under pressure.
I mean, I'm watching Lions games this year, and I'm not the hugest Aiden O'Connell fan, but I'm thinking, what would Aiden O'Connell do if he was where Jared Goff is right now?
Right.
It's an interesting thought experiment. I think he'd have had a lot better season than he had with the Raiders if he was playing for the Lions. But I think 90% of quarterbacks in the NFL would be better with the Lions than they are with their current team. I think Brock Purdy would have won 3 Super Bowls right now playing for Ben Johnson his entire career. I don't think that's even debatable. I think Ben Johnson he's just that dude, in the way that I thought Antonio Pierce was that dude last year, but I think Ben Johnson actually is that dude. Sometimes people come along who are so good, they're undeniable. And if you have watched any Detroit Lions game in the last 2 years and seen what they do consistently on offense and the point per game average that they have held that entire time, which I believe is north of 30, which might I add is a place the Chiefs were never at this year.
Right. But the Raiders. Oh wait, no, they didn't.
Well, I don't know, maybe. I don't know. I haven't really kept track of the Raiders this year too much, to be honest with you. But that's a joke, by the way.
That's a joke.
Yeah, but the Lions' offense has been so consistently good that you just can't say it's a fluke, and you just can't say, Ben Johnson isn't that great. He is. He is that great. Everything that they do has to have his fingerprints on it. His synergy and cohesion with Dan Campbell has been nothing short of miraculous. Lions fans have been waiting since the mid-'50s to be as good as they are now. They went through the whole Bobby Lane curse. They went through having the greatest running back to ever play football on their team and won nothing with him. They have endured all of that. And now they are where they are. And I would say it's at least half because of Ben Johnson. And if he can do that for the Lions, he can do that for us.
And I would say that the other half of that is allowing the team to fail during the rebuild, which is not something that the Raiders have been allowed to do. And you can see that from everything that has happened since John Gruden, since Jack Del Rio, really, they were successful. The Raiders made the decision to pivot and go to John Gruden. John Gruden had a fairly long leash and things were happening. And then he did his John Gruden things. That led to Bisaccia, a playoff spot, Josh McDaniels' decision. McDaniels not getting enough. The immediacy in the NFL is tragic for some teams, and it has been tragic for the Raiders. If Antonio Pierce and Tom Telesco were given a 4 or 5 year leash with which to build a team like Ben Johnson and Dan Campbell were with the Detroit Lions, there is a possibility that foundation could have been built, and we could have found ourselves in a couple years with some patience with a competitive team. Instead, we're building from the start again. Hopefully the vision that Ben Johnson acquired as the offensive coordinator in Detroit, knowing that he wanted to go out and sign a free agent in Dave Montgomery that was mediocre at best with the Bears, targeting Jahmyr Gibbs and doing what it took to acquire him in the draft, going out and making the trade to grab Jared Goff, the drafting on defense, getting Kirby Joseph and Aiden Hutchinson, Terry and Arnold. They've made the linebacker core that they have. They've made the right decisions almost every step of the way, including to a lesser extent bringing Tim Patrick over, who the Broncos basically left for dead because of his injury history. And it's not that Tim Patrick is anything special, but he has been a solid addition to that team that works within the scheme, similar to what we saw a lot with Michael Crabtree and Zay Jones and that ilk of wide receiver. So the only thing that I would say is please, Mark Davis, just give this time to percolate. Coffee is not made by snapping your fingers unless you have a Keurig. You want to let the ground soak for a while before you press the water out. That's how you make coffee. Don't press the water out before it's done brewing.
Yep. The Lions are not a team who historically has done much in the way of free agency. They haven't been, big spenders to go out and make a giant splash. They have relied on drafting. And in the Matt Millen years, their drafting was hit or miss. They had, they drafted Calvin Johnson, but for every Calvin Johnson, there was 20 busts on the team. But you look at the last 5 years of Lions drafts, and you have guys like Sam Laporta and Jahmyr Gibbs and Amon-Ra St. Brown and Penei Sewell and, Kirby Joseph and Malcolm Rodriguez. And, there's 20 guys on the Lions team that they've drafted and turned into bona fide NFL stars that maybe another team might not have been able to draft that well. And the Raiders certainly haven't. You look at the last 5 years of Raider drafts and you have bust after bust after bust after bust, guys getting arrested, guys killing people, guys threatening people with guns, guys getting arrested for drunk driving, ridiculous shit that, that will destroy a team from the inside because you didn't vet these people well enough, or just because you got unlucky in the case of Henry Ruggs. I mean, Henry Ruggs didn't have any character issues at all in college, and then he gets to Las Vegas and he drives into a lady, kills her and her dog, and game over. Nobody could have foreseen that. That's mostly just bad luck. But that's the kind of draft pick shit that the Lions haven't had that the Raiders have, which is why the Lions are where they are, why we're where we are right now. So you have to hit on your picks. The Raiders usually do quite a bit in free agency, and then they certainly have over the last few years. But those missed draft picks that could be superstars on this team and aren't are absolutely killing us. We should have Jonathan Abrams still on this team doing amazingly well. We should have Henry Ruggs still on this team doing amazingly well. We should have random quarterback that we should have drafted 4 years ago doing amazingly well. Zamir White should be doing amazingly well, and he's not. The one guy we have, or the two guys we have who are doing amazingly well are Jackson Harris-Johnson and Brock Bowers, who we both drafted last year. That's the foundation of our team. But like the Lions were 4 years ago when they had, a good draft class, but, very little depth, that's in the future, a few years. The Raiders are looking down the road.
I'll throw out the Max Crosby and the defensive secondary as guys that are, they're getting it done. We've whiffed a lot on offense, and it would be nice to see something turn around. If we've whiffed except for Brock Bowers and Jackson Powers Johnson, Colton Miller. There are a smattering of Pro Bowl.
Trey Tucker has been fine. He just hasn't been exceptional. But Trey Tucker was what, like a 5th round pick?
Yeah.
I mean, what do you expect? So
he was an absolute
for a 5th round. He's been great for a 5th rounder.
Fun fact, on Sleeper, the fantasy football app, if you go to the players page and you look at the trending for dynasty offseason free agents or whatever, the number 3 added player behind Tyler Higbee and Taj Washington is Henry Ruggs.
Interesting.
What? In the last,
getting out of prison?
No. In the last however long this tracks, Ruggs has been picked up by 1.4 thousand teams, just ahead of Miles Sanders and Joe Milton.
That's so weird,
right? Like, and that's been on trend for like a week, which is like every time I go to the app, I'm like, why Henry Ruggs? And then the next time I go, why still Henry Ruggs? All right, we talked about T. Higgins. I feel like he would be an excellent addition to this team. We have 2 guys that are really, really good out of the slot in Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers. I feel like I'm accurate in saying that Jacoby has 1 more year left on his deal. We could always extend him, but running out of the middle of the field and then having somebody like T. Higgins running outside, I feel like that would be a great addition to this team. We will see. The other guy, and this is somebody that is a very controversial figure, and I did post a poll today over on Twitter. I will read the results of that poll. But I asked everybody, if the Raiders sign Sam Darnold and Deontay Johnson in free agency, will you be satisfied? 43 votes, 93% said no, they're bad. And then the other one, 11 votes, 100% said no, wouldn't help. Now that said, I understand the reputation that Deontay Johnson has right now. He just got waived by his 3rd team of the season. That's a problem. However, when he was in Pittsburgh, he was very, very effective. Made his way over to the Carolina Panthers, got bounced to go to the Ravens, didn't play with the Ravens, and then got kicked off the team essentially because he brought himself out of a game in week 13, gets waived by the Ravens, picked up by the Texans, makes a catch in the playoff game, and then today gets waived. So he's out there on playoff waivers. I don't know how playoff waivers work, but the way regular waivers work is the team with the worst record has the first shot, and then it goes in order by worst record after that, or best. It goes in order of worst record. So team 32, then team 31, then team 30. And if you pick somebody up off waivers, you have to pay the current contract that they're under. That might be prohibitive. There's also the possibility that there are playoff teams out there that could pick them up if nobody wants to deal with it. But if it's somebody that's cheap that you can bring in, who's essentially on a 1-year deal or something similar, the guy has shown that he's capable of being 140 to 150 target guy. And if he can come into a situation where he's happy and he actually gets the ball, maybe that's a possibility.
Well,
What
you put up with that kind of attitude for somebody like Chad Johnson or Terrell Owens. You don't put up with that for Deontay Johnson. I have followed Deontay Johnson since he was in college at the University of Florida. Deontay Johnson has always had $1 million body and a 10-cent head. He's been a knucklehead since he was 19 years old, and he's not going to change now. He is the last person the Raiders need on their team in that locker room when they're trying to rebuild a culture. That is absolutely not a guy I would want to bring in. But there is a guy, if I may speak here on my trade, my acquiring of free agents.
The floor is yours.
And it's a guy who used to play for the Silver and Black many, many moons ago. And that is a certain Khalil Mack. Khalil Mack is done with the Chargers. Khalil Mack Unfortunately for him, went from 16 sacks 2 years ago to 7 sacks last year. So his production has certainly dipped. I don't think his ability has dipped whatsoever, and I don't think he would charge top dollar for a new contract. I think he's a guy the Raiders absolutely should look at coming in for a rotational defensive end role. Ideally, what happens with the Raiders in the draft is they take Abdul Carter, who I believe is the best player in the 2025 draft, and take a quarterback in the second round, maybe somebody like Quinn Ewers or Jackson Dart or somebody like that. Because I don't believe where the Raiders are going to be drafting, there's going to be a quarterback worth taking. There's quarterbacks worth taking at 1, and I think Shedeur Sanders maybe at 2 or 3 or 4. At 6, no, I wouldn't do it. I would take Genty or I would take Abdul Carter, and I would wait till the second round to grab a quarterback. In that case, you have Max Crosby on one side, and you have Abdul Carter on the other. And I think you can sub in Khalil Mack as a rush outside linebacker or a mentor to Carter. I think that'd be fantastic. Now, I do know that Khalil Mack has been, making some noise about retirement, but I think Khalil Mack has a ton of gas left in the tank. He's not that old. He was drafted in 2014. This is his 10th year in the league. And, a defensive end of his ability has 2 or 3 quality years as a backup still left in him as a rush end. He's a guy I would love for the Raiders to bring back. Gruden isn't here anymore. He's not walking through that door. Everybody in Raider Nation still loves Khalil Mack. He never did anything to us. So he's a guy I would love for the Raiders to bring back into the fold.
Absolutely. My Mac jersey would be relevant again.
Millions of Mac jerseys would be relevant again.
I wouldn't have to wait for him to retire. No, I love that idea. I love the idea of it. I don't think that we're going to be able to bring Kuntz back, although I want to. But I feel like if you have an Abdul Carter and Max Crosby, you got Christian Wilkins on the inside, you got Tyree Wilson playing the 3 tech, and Mac rotating in. I love that idea. Just touching on the draft real quick, and we will do a mock draft next week. So or at least a few of them. But Jackson Dart is actually getting. He is a guy that I mentioned a couple weeks ago on the program to draft somebody else in the first round and draft Jackson Dart in the second. But he is starting to be steamed up to the point where it's likely that he's going to be targeted right around the middle of the first round. So, or the top of the middle of the first round. So in the 6 to 10 range. So I had an idea about Quinn Ewers based on specific aspects of his what do you call it? Recruiting profile. There's a hit rate that goes along with being a 5-star recruit, and Quinn Ewers is the only quarterback coming out in this draft that was a 5-star recruit by both Rivals and 24/7. Shedeur Sanders was a star or less, and Cam Ward was a 4-star as well. Well, when you look at the hit rates in the NFL, 5-star quarterbacks hit at 25%, and lesser guys at 4 stars hit at 10%. So you're taking a real hit by taking somebody. You're lessening the chances of them being, a star in the NFL if when you start taking away those recruiting stars. Now, that said, watching Quinn Ewers play recently, he's probably part of that 75% that doesn't hit. Now, Jackson Dart is a guy I've had my eye on for a couple years, and I really, really love his profile. I look at Drew Aller, and he's a big dude that has a lot of tools, and he's going to go back to school for another year and get some seasoning, which is something that I thought that Bo Nix and Michael Penix should do, and they did. It's something that I thought that Cam Ward should do, and he's not. But Jackson Dart, I've been watching for a couple years, and he does have that ability to escape the pocket, use his legs, not as prolific, but certainly in a similar style to Drake May. He's got a big downfield arm. He can work on making better decisions and not throwing interceptions. But I really, really like the profile. Now, if we take Ward or Sanders at 6, I would be very upset. If we took Jackson Dart at 6, I wouldn't be upset at all. And there is a faction in the football prognostication community that is starting to come out and say he's the best quarterback of this draft. And I agree. I totally agree. So if we come out of the draft with Jackson Dart, I'm not going to be upset at all. I don't want to take a quarterback in the top 10. I never want to take a quarterback in the top 10. Trade back until you pick up some gifts before you grab him. But if he's there at 6 and the Raiders decide that he's the guy and Ben Johnson is the head coach that's doing it, I'm not going to cry in my tea.
Now, this is such a bad year for quarterbacks in the draft. This is probably the worst quarterback draft class I've seen since like the Geno Smith, the EJ Manuel draft in like 2015 or whatever year that was.
I want to say the Kenny Pickett year is pretty.
Kenny Pickett year was pretty darn bad too.
2020.
This is not great. Next year is going to be an awful lot better, and the year after that's also going to be pretty darn good. This is not the year to have the number 1 pick if you need a quarterback. It's just not.
Right. So this is the year to go with Aiden O'Connell or Sam Darnold for a whole year, and then next year you're
it's about value. If you can get a guy who's good in the second round, you do it. It's just not the year to take a quarterback in the top 5. That would probably happen. This is the year to take a defensive end or a running back. Can I list some of the running backs who are in this year's draft? I mean, we have Genty, we have Omarion from North Carolina, we have Jordan James, we have Ollie Gordon from Oklahoma State, we have Martinez from Miami. We have probably 20 guys who are running backs in this draft who can be NFL starters. The amount of running back talent that's going to be injected into the NFL at a time when the value of a running back is skyrocketing is insane. Some of the guys who are in this draft will be first-round draft picks in your fantasy league for the next 5 and 6 years. It's going to be absolutely insane. The running back position stonks on the way up.
Caleb Johnson from Iowa. You have Travion Henderson from Ohio State, who would have been
Quinshon Judkins too, right?
Who would have been the number 1 running back in last year's class. Quinshon Judkins. You have Raheem Sanders, who was a bell cow at Arkansas and was on the way to being a third-year declare and one of the best out there. And he got hurt along the way. Finished up at South Carolina, I want to say. He's coming out. There are so many running backs. This is the year to take a first-round running back.
The 2 Penn State boys are running it back with the Nittany Lions.
I know.
Next
I'm
year.
So mad because
this is not the year because they'll get lost in the shuffle. They come out next year, they'll be top 20 picks. Both of them will.
Right, but that's what Travion Henderson thought last year, and here he comes out this year, and Ollie Gordon and Ashton Genty and Caleb Johnson have all ascended and passed him up.
He should be a late second-round pick. He'll be just fine. It's not going to affect him at all.
He had one run in that playoff game where like he kind of came around and on I want to say it was a swing pass, and he hit the hole and just exploded, boom, and just to the house. And I was like, oh.
Scouts do not miss that. No matter who else is in the draft, scouts do not miss that. They will key on that with their game film, and they will find you.
Yes. Speaking of that, there are quite a few guys that on my way to the Senior Bowl, I'm going to go ahead and watch at the running back position. So I'm going to be able to get some tape, some video on. Here we go. Cameron Scotabo from Arizona State, Jarquez Hunter from Auburn, RJ Harvey from Central Florida, Marcus Yarns from Delaware, Devin Neal from Kansas. I like him a lot. Damian Martinez, you like him a lot. Donovan Edwards and Kalel Mullings from Michigan, Ollie Gordon and Woody Marks, Tootin Bayshall from Virginia Tech, Brashard Smith from SMU, Alan LeQuint Allen from Syracuse. So it's going to be. I'm going to get some video of all those guys.
I mean, like Scotabo, I think is the guy who fits best with the Raiders.
Sure, he's big.
But like I said, there's 20 guys who could be potential impact fantasy draft picks for the next 5 or 6 years in this draft alone. It's absolutely insane how good this running back class is compared to the quarterback class, which is fucking abysmal.
Right. All right. You guys, it is time for your favorite, my favorite, and the best segment on all of the internets. It's time for the Raiderdamus Hall of Shame. I love Slayer, but I wrote a little theme song for you. It's Raiderdamus Hall of Shade, Raiderdamus Hall of Shade. Take it away, Raiderdamus.
Hey, I appreciate a jingle. And away we go. If you have watched a primetime NFL game at any point in the last 30 years, there is a good chance that the matchup was the Dallas Cowboys against one of the other crappy teams in their division or the NFC. As someone who was born on the West Coast, I never had any interest whatsoever in watching the Cowboys, but there they were every week sticking up my television. The Cowboys are the most valuable professional sports team in the world, and they have the most fans of any team in football, so it's natural that they dominate sports news coverage, but that does not make them any more palatable than they are. When the Cowboys win, the media fillets them, and when they lose, the narrative is, what did the Cowboys do wrong, instead of what did the other team do right? In the offseason, the narrative is, what can the Cowboys do to get better? As if anything short of the timely and long overdue death of their owner will help them. The Cowboys are a machine designed solely to piss me off, and that's why they are today's inductees into the Raiderdamus Hall of Shade. The reason the Cowboys are so popular is a simple one that most people would never think of. That answer is air conditioning. The NFL has been around since 1920, and professional football has been around for a few decades prior to that. But until the 1960s, there were no permanent long-term football franchises any further south than Washington, D.C. The reason for this is that the population of the U.S. was heavily skewed to the Northeast and the Midwest and California due to the more pleasant climate. Those regions, as you might imagine, were where the professional sports teams resided. With the advent of air conditioning in the 1940s and 50s, more people began to migrate south and live in places like Georgia, Florida, and Texas. Those people loved football and supported college football in droves. But the NFL eluded them all because the Washington Redskins owner, George Preston Marshall, held territorial rights to the South, despite his team not being in the South at all. His team was just the furthest south of all the teams in the NFL, and there was nobody else down there. In 1952, the struggling New York Yanks NFL franchise was purchased by two Texas millionaires, and they moved to Dallas, where they became the Texans. That team failed and then became the Baltimore Colts. In 1960, the new AFL had a Dallas franchise, which failed and moved to Kansas City, where they became the Chiefs. The dream of having football in Dallas, however, would not die. Texas oil man Clint Murchison tried getting Marshall to sell the Redskins to him in 1959, which Marshall agreed to until the very last minute when he attempted to alter the terms of the deal like some racist version of Darth Vader. Murchison called the deal off, and Marshall did not take kindly to that, blocking any attempt to have a team in Texas for Murchison. But fortune smiled on Texas because Marshall, being the dickhead that he was, had a falling out with the leader of the Redskins band, a man named Barney Breeskin, who happened to own the rights to the Redskins fight song, Hail to the Redskins. He had sold the rights to that song to Murchison right before the expansion team vote in 1960. During the vote, which had to be unanimous to approve a new NFL owner, Murchison revealed to Marshall that he now owned the rights to Hail to the Redskins, and unless Marshall voted in his favor, that song would never get played again. Marshall was angry and said a number of choice words, but he voted begrudgingly to allow Murchison to own the new Dallas team. That is why the Cowboys and what is now the Commanders are rivals, aside from the Cowboys and Indians motif. And so from 1960 to 1966, the Cowboys were the one and only pro football team in the entire American South. In 1966, the Falcons and Dolphins came into existence, but the damage was done by then. The Cowboys had 6 years been the only game in town and the team most frequently on the televisions of every home in the country, especially in the booming and football-crazed populations of many southern cities, which desired a distraction from the ever-looming presence of the Vietnam War and civil rights battles. Everyone could agree on one thing, that football is awesome, and the Cowboys became the focus of that sentiment. Under the leadership of Tom Landry, Gil Brandt, and Tex Schramm, the Cowboys built a powerhouse franchise which saw numerous Super Bowl appearances and 20 straight winning seasons. In 1978, NFL Films released a Cowboys highlight video which dubbed them America's Team, mostly because their fans infested the stadiums of every city they played in. To this day, the Cowboys are the most popular team in 5 U.S. states and are in the top 5 of popularity in 38 states. As the years have gone on, however, it's clear that the America's Team moniker and the patriotic, squeaky clean image it represents is nothing but propaganda, in the same way that Baghdad Bob insisted that the American army was definitely not about to roll into Baghdad and topple Saddam Hussein's regime. The biggest difference now from then is ownership. Jerry Jones purchased the team in 1989 and fired Landry and brought in former Miami Hurricanes head coach Jimmy Johnson, who won 2 Super Bowls with the Cowboys. That team was an absolute circus, with rampant drug use and solicitation of prostitution and everything that would have made the Cowboys fans from 1964 sick to their stomachs, as they had not fought the Kaiser just so some thug like Michael Irvin could hold coke orgies in a hotel room. But that group did win, and when Jerry had all he could stomach of Jimmy Johnson, he handed the team over to a man who had experience with a team full of knuckleheads, former Oklahoma Sooners coach Barry Switzer, who then won another Super Bowl. And that was the end of their success. But they're still on my TV. They won't go away. The media tried to convince me that Quincy Carter was good. They tried to tell me Miles Austin was good. They tried to tell me Michael Gallup was good. Every flash in the pan that has ever put up a huge game for the Cowboys is supposed to be a legend. But the Cowboys themselves are average, sometimes bad, sometimes good, but never great like they once were. However, their fan base remains, and they will always pull in numbers in the same way that KISS does. Their best days were in the 1970s, and they really have no business being where they are anymore. And they haven't done anything special in years, but whether they are great or whether they suck, they are entertaining. KISS, despite being 90 years old, is still far more entertaining than the Cowboys, because at least KISS will tell us who their new guitarist is, and we know it's just some dude dressed up like Ace Frehley, and we don't have to go to a KISS concert and pretend Cooper Rush is a quality NFL quarterback. Perhaps even better analogy would be Marilyn Manson. Like the Cowboys, Marilyn Manson was innovative and relevant in 1994. And today, like the Cowboys, Manson is just usually drunk and stumbling around making a fool of himself, leading all of his fans to wonder why they ever liked him at all. But this is who they are. This is who they've always been. It just took a lot of media glazing and makeup to make us all look the other way. But the time for pretending is gone. The country must come together in mutual disdain for the Cowboys and all the imaginary glamour they represent. Otherwise, we will never get our primetime back. So fuck you, Cowboys. I hope Jerry Jones dies and the team gets bought by a Saudi Arabian sheik who moves you to Dubai and you play all your games at primetime in Riyadh. That's all I got to say about that.
Heck yeah. Yeah, I'm really tired of the NFL scheduling and how it's always the Cowboys and the Chiefs, and there's like the 5-team rotation of Sunday Night Football, and it was the Giants every year until a couple years ago.
And they were worse than the Cowboys. They would have like 2 wins and they'd be on like week 16. Oh, Monday Night Football, the Giants are playing. Like anyone gives a shit. I want to see, the good teams. And to be fair, the Chiefs, they've been one of the good teams. I still hate them and don't want to see them on my TV, but they at least have earned it. The Cowboys haven't earned it in fucking 30 years.
I don't even care if it's a good team. I just want to see teams that I don't watch very often. You know what I mean? Like it's like in baseball when they have the unbalanced schedule where we see the same divisional teams 19 times in a season. Stop it. Give us a Cubs home and home. Stop it. Just give us teams that we don't watch very often. I'm sure not a lot of people watched the Carolina Panthers this year, but I would have liked to see the Panthers. I would have liked to watch the Panthers and Patriots play because I don't watch a lot of either of them. But it's a better matchup for me than listen to Chris Collinsworth fillet Patrick Mahomes all night when they're, squeaking one out against the fucking Buccaneers. I don't know. Anyway, you got my ire up.
I understand. I feel the same way. But, if I was working for a TV company, I wanted to put the game that most people would watch. Of course, I put the Cowboys on there. But that just means Cowboy fans are idiots because they care about a team who hasn't done shit in 30 years. Now, of course, the Raiders haven't done shit in 30 years.
40 years.
At least, okay, fine, 40 years. I was born a little bit after their last Super Bowl, and I have a giant beard right now. I'm an old man. So, but I understand. The Raiders don't need to be on primetime a lot, but the Cowboys don't either. It's ridiculous that they have that many people on TV pretending to give a shit about them. Nobody goes on TV and pretends to give a shit about the Raiders. You either love the Raiders or you hate the Raiders. Right. But people are paid to go on TV and pretend the Cowboys are important. They're not. They suck. Stop talking about them.
Yep. So speaking of old, I was in the grocery store today, and in line behind me were two high school kids. One of them is flipping through an app, and he's looking at music, and he says, I really love this album. And his friend looks over at his app and says, I have it on cassette. And my ears perked up, and I was like, did that kid just say cassette? And then the guy that said cassette looks at his friend, and he said, yeah, it's hella old, like from the 90s. And I just...
I would die a little inside.
I did. My heart broke a little bit. All right, you guys.
Was it? Did he see what? Did he ever see
No,
what it was?
No, I wasn't close enough.
Hopefully, it was something cool like Super Unknown or never mind.
No. The cassette was from the 90s, so yeah, maybe it could have been, but they are so like vinyl and cassette are huge right now. So even new albums are coming out on cassette, and I have a cassette deck, so I should start buying them. All right, you guys. Thank you for watching. We will be back next week, Tuesday. We will have mock drafts and a Senior Bowl preview, because following that, I will be on my way to Mobile, Alabama for the Senior Bowl. I will be bringing you some exclusive footage. So you might not know this, you might know this, but I work for a platform called Player Profiler. I'm going down to the Senior Bowl with them. I also work for Fantasy Football Advice Network, and I'm with the Andropolis and Fantasy Football Plus. And so I'm going to be doing stuff for just about every platform, whether it's NFL news or like fantasy football, but I'm going to exclusively be doing some Raiders Uncovered stuff that I'm not going to be sharing on any of the other platforms. So only you can see that right here. Make sure that you like, subscribe, hit the bell, all that stuff. And that's it. Anything you want to say goodbye?
No, just
all right.
Our normal sign off. You know what it is.
I want the money that I get from the Lions winning the Super Bowl, but also it'd be nice to hire Ben Johnson next Monday. Thanks, everybody.